Um, I can tell you we have two questions from members of the public, and they both relate to item number 7, which is on the greenways. And they've been published on the website, and members of the Assembly have them too. And I'm going to come back to those, and we'll get those put and responded to under item 7. Item number 5, petitions. So there have been 2 petitions that I need to refer to. One which I think started life as coming to us in the GCP, but was subsequently redirected to the Cambridgeshire County Council at the decision of the petitioners. But just so that we note what it is, but it isn't to us. It was in the following terms: the Joint Assembly is asked to note receipt of a 624 signature petition relating to the Camborne to Cambridge project, presented by Cambridge Past, Present and Future, and supported by an alliance of organisations. Following discussions with the petitioner, it's been agreed that the most appropriate route for the petition is for it to be formally presented to Cambridgeshire County Council meeting when it considers the Transport and Work Act order in the new year. So that is for us to note. And the other one relates to the Comberton Greenway proposals, item number 7, and it's been presented by the Highfield Farm Touring Park, and we'll come back to that under that agenda item so that we can focus on what it's actually petitioning for. Now, we come to the first substantive item, which is item 6, page 65 of the reports, and this is the quarterly progress report, and it's going to be presented by Niamh, and then after that I'm going to go through the different sections so that if there are points that members want to raise, we can talk about the same thing at the same time. So, Niamh, would you like to take us through it, please?
Thank you, Chair. And just to introduce my colleague Thomas, who is the GCP Programme Manager, who's involved across this report before publication. So if I kind of run through the points at 1.2, Chair, and then take any questions or points of clarity after that. So we're asking the Joint Assembly to note the Making Connections consultation. You'll all have engaged in that outside of this forum, but just to kind of raise that formally. We're also asking you to note the request to kind of approve the appointment of a consultant to support the GCP's Gateway Review process. So it's maybe worth just briefly updating the Assembly on kind of where we are around that process. I think last time the Assembly met, we were waiting for a bit of clarity from DLUC, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, around what the process would look like to 2025. We now have that, and Michelle, my colleague, sitting down there, has worked quite hard with DLUC to get that clarity. I think, to be fair to DLUC, some of the civil servants have been quite busy on other stuff. But we now do have clarity. So what it looks like is they have appointed a consultant, SQW. You might remember that we worked with them quite closely during the first Gateway review that GCP went through. SQW will be supporting government gateway reviewing each devolved area that's due a gateway review around the very beginning of 2025. They have set out various timelines and various reports that are due throughout the next couple of years. That will start to come at us quite quickly now. So that they want something in January, they want something again in the spring, they want something probably then again in the autumn. So we'll be working through that as officers quite quickly. But what we think we need is some additional kind of support to work with government and to work with the consultants around some of the key asks that I don't think DLUC have quite developed just yet, but I think will start to come out more clearly as SQW get their kind of feet under the table. So that's what that's about, and we'll keep the Joint Assembly updated on progress around that. Happy to take any questions on that, but it is linked to the next point, which is around a request to continue funding the work that the Centre for Business Research are currently doing for us, which I think you'll have seen before, and some of you I know were at that presentation a couple of weeks ago. And there's also a request to engage more fully in some other work that they do, which is an annual kind of data draw, which looks quite different to the quarterly stuff that they do for us. And the difference, I guess, which might be useful to draw out on the annual draw, is that that's in collaboration with a number of different organisations, including Cambridge Ahead, including Marshall, including ARM, including Mills and Reeve, and the Combined Authority, to try and get that richer kind of picture of the economy across the broader geography. I guess as officers, as we've engaged with government and SQW around what we think Gateway 2 is going to look like, the importance of having really good, robust and unique, this is unique, Katie and I were just talking about this, this level of data draw isn't happening anywhere else in the country. So certainly as officers, we think it's extremely important to continue to have access to that. That's a very brief rundown of what we're asking you to specifically look at, but happy to take questions, Chair, in the way that you'd like to manage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niamh. So those are 2 points that Niamh has highlighted, the consultant to help the Gateway review process and the continued funding for the Centre for Business work on the local economy. And I'm going to come to those as we go through the different sections so that we kind of don't miss out other points as well. So the first of those sections is the strategic overview, which is pages 66 to 68 of the reports. And there is some other stuff in there too, but that also includes the point about the consultant for the Gateway review. Are there any questions or views to be expressed on that section, please? Claire.
A few comments just about the minutiae almost. We take for granted that we know what KI means, for example, in 3.3, just a request that whenever we do have that sort of language, we do put knowledge intensive. And maybe just a little sentence about what that is so that the wider reading public can grasp that much more quickly. I think points like in 3.4, the Cambridge population has grown by nearly 18% since 2011 are really at the heart of a lot of what we're doing. So again, that could perhaps be emphasised a little bit more, just as very useful context in the story. 3.11 is maybe going slightly beyond this, but it's one of the questions that you just raised, so I'll just cover it. I think it's really important to note, or at least to ask, and I think get the clarification that we have been asked by the national organisation for the Gateway to recruit our own consultant, rather than us just thinking of it as a little vanity project that we're recruiting on because we quite like the idea of having a consultant on this. It I think, is the case that it's almost been mandated that we do have somebody.
Okay, no one else has indicated, so would you like to respond?
Yeah. So Claire, just on your third point, so it's not mandated as such, but I think certainly what we'd learned from round 1 and in discussions with government around how I think they're shaping this slightly differently to last time, I think it's definitely advised that we have robust support. Does that, okay, yeah.
I think that gives us better context, doesn't it? Yeah. Are there any other points in relation to this? Because if there are not, then Neil, you have something.
Just a quick comment. There's it says here 4.13 any material impact of the war in Ukraine and the ensuing recession and cost of living crisis. I think that is more of a political statement. I think this country was heading to a recession before there were any Russian boots on the ground, and this is something I would ask to avoid, and so perhaps reword that.
Sorry, that could open a really big debate. So let's see if it's possible to do that in a way which doesn't open up other possibility of disagreeing. But yeah. So look, what I hear and see from the lack of hands at the moment is that we would support the the executive in appointing, deciding to appoint a consultant to help us with the Gateway review, and that the points of clarification that Claire has drawn out are helpful. But let's go on to the next section whilst there are no hands. So the next section is the transport work stream, which is paragraphs 4.2 to 4.5, page 68 to 69. And it's also Appendix 1, which is pages 72 to 78. So all of the RAG rating and commentaries that go with that. Are there any questions on that? Claire?
A very quick one, the consultation being launched, thank you for that because it has generated a huge amount of coverage and debate. So just like to record, I know we're not speaking about that today, but the level of discussion is very healthy, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me from the report whether or not there was anything actually going on at the moment on the Chisholm Trail Part 2. There's almost £1 million expenditure, so I guess that implies that there's something happening. But I certainly remember us saying that we might be able to open little bits of phase 2 before the whole thing was ready. And I'm wondering, for example, when we might get the part that runs along the railway line under the Mill Road Bridge available and open.
Thanks, Helen. I'm going to group these in threes so that we don't lose the point. The third in this group from Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this relates to Appendix 1, which is the delivery status of the transport projects. I've noted that the target completion date sometimes changes from one report to another. For example, Fulbourn Greenway in the previous report was target completion date was 2024, now it's 2025. And I think in Appendix 6, when it talks about the meaning of the amber RAG status, it says delivery projected after target date, but with measures in place to meet the target date. And this may include redefining the target date. So I'm kind of, I suppose, really a comment is I prefer to see this target dates stay the same and not be changed, but change the forecast completion date, because otherwise the target date kind of ends up just tracking the forecast completion date. So it's just a comment on that. Maybe there's something, maybe an officer has got a comment on it, but otherwise my preference would be to see the target dates stay the same and not be changed from report to report. Yes, or why that's happened, yes.
Sorry. Or if not, to be transparent about the way targets would have to change. Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah. So I'm going to take those three and refer them to you, Nick.
So if I just pick the point up on target dates, and Peter might pick up the point on some detail around Chisholm Trail, we'll look at that, Paul, and make it much clearer. Thank you for raising it.
So in terms of Chisholm, I mean, the consultation was undertaken earlier in the year. We're still reflecting on some of that. We're in discussions, particularly on the Network Rail section. That's where we think we should be able to make some short-term progress. And certainly in terms of the large amount of that expenditure will be associated with that link, we need to reach a final agreement with Network Rail, and we haven't yet done so. But those conversations are very live and increasingly pressing.
Okay, thank you both. And then I've got Heather and then Claire, the other Claire. Sorry, I'm confusing myself because we have four people who share two names with them here. But Heather first.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is in relation to page 72 on the Whittlesford Station Transport Infrastructure Strategy or Travel Hub. Sort of with the Whittlesford, it's common knowledge that we are going to need to reduce our projects because of the financial. We always over sort of, not going to over deliver, that's the wrong word I'm looking, over program, that's it. Over delivery is never a problem, I'll put that out there, but over program. So I think because it's been quite quiet, there was almost a feeling from residents that this was sort of just quietly disappearing into the background and would get dropped. obviously this is back on here with an amber and the whole project date being quite swift. Appreciate from the report it says about the county council doing the A505 strategy, which has led to delays, but just wondering if there's something more so that residents really are, we don't want this to become a shock if if people think it's sort of gone away and then potentially something comes back. And that's what I fear we might get some public tension around that because the way it sort of went away and has literally just popped back in very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Also on the transport delivery table, I think that just putting an annual date, a year date, is really not sufficient. I think it would be helpful to have it first quarter, second quarter, just to so that we have a more accurate indication of, to follow Paul's point, that the timetable has shifted, to have a more accurate indication of by how much it shifted.
Neve, would you like to deal with those?
Should I do that? Turn Neve. So in terms of Whittleford, yeah, the project was paused because it was so heavily contingent upon the A505. But we have had a number of pushes from the local area, local residents around. There were some smaller elements, particularly around active travel, that are probably deliverable. So the work that we're doing is just to review those elements, not the larger elements that will impact on the A505. But I certainly take the point in terms of presentation and making sure everyone clearly understands what the scope and the magnitude of these proposals will be. So we'll take that as an action to address. In terms of Claire's point, I mean, first quarter, second quarter is a challenge with a number of these projects. They are large projects that can move as a result. We were talking here about Chisholm Trail and negotiations with one particular landowner. And if we went down the line of putting down a quarter, then I suspect, accepting Paul's point earlier on, that dates shouldn't move without clear understanding and presentation to yourselves. I think if we were going down first quarter, second quarter and the like, these schemes would move quite a lot within years. So I think it's, you know, from a delivery perspective, I think that would be very challenging to do it in a meaningful way, because we're waiting, as I say, for land acquisition or commercial agreements or construction timetables to drop in. And we're trying to get the right balance between transparency, but then you being able to hold us to account. And if it flips by, a couple of weeks into a different quarter, then I'm not sure that would necessarily give you the oversight that you'd be wanting.
Thank you,
Fair
Peter.
enough. Obviously, the beginning of 2025 is very different from the end of 2025. That was my main point.
And I do accept that. I do accept that, particularly on the larger projects. Then there needs to be an element of what I would suggest wriggle room in terms of delivery dates on them.
Some sort of signal consensus when we agree that it's a long time between January and December. Okay, I see no other hands at the moment, so there are no other questions on the transport section. We go to the skills work stream, which is in Appendix 2, page 79 to 81. Are there contributions on that, please?
Yes, just to reiterate some of the things that I know Kristen, Anne and others have raised previously, is the ambitions in this space, given the challenges that are being faced and the existing and predicted growth. Is there anything more we could be doing beyond our work with Form the Future, and how are we approaching that using the skills working group as well?
Thank you. Are there any other? Katie.
I'd like to ask about whether we can support or highlight more apprenticeships in the construction industry, because we need to, part of decarbonising is retrofitting, and we have a shortage of skilled workers in the construction industry, and the skills for retrofitting are different from new build, and there is such a need for retrofitting that we need to speak out about this and try and get support the Cambridge Regional College where they do teach construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather?
Thank you. From probably more of a rural South Cambs perspective as well, agriculture and particularly, I know, seasonal work, it's getting harder and harder to actually get people starting off through agricultural college. And I think food, like energy security, food security is a big concern and issue at the moment. And so we really could do with trying to make sure that whatever we're looking at when we're giving skills options, that agriculture isn't forgotten, because it is a big employer for Cambridgeshire.
Those three include a bit of a challenge to the original focus on STEM subjects, because things in the construction industry, things in agriculture actually show out to be more shortage areas, or the ones we're more aware of now. So I need them.
I think that's a really helpful observation. And in order of the comments that were kind of made, Karen, on your sort of comments, I suppose, if there's ambitions from the Joint Assembly and the board to do more in different things, then we would try and help you navigate what that could look like. The sort of day-to-day reality, we continue to work with the combined authority to just make sure that we're very closely aligned and indeed complementing the work that the combined authority are doing in this space. And they've got a very much more specific remit around skills than the GCP does through City Deal. In fact, Bridget Smith and I met with Combined Authority officers a couple of weeks ago on just this topic, and making sure that we were aligned. So that is ongoing. But to reiterate the point, if there's more that members want us to do, then we'll help to look at that.
Heather?
Can I say as well, particularly with the agriculture, for some people it's actually access, because it's not funny, there aren't farming colleges in the centre of Cambridge and some of the areas. So something that we could look at is actually how people are able to access, because some people aren't pursuing it because they can't actually get there, which is different.
Thank you.
So just on that point, which I think links to your first point, the work that the board approved to extend this service the last time the board met was around better data collection, but was also around supporting students to access stuff where it was challenging to do so. So you have built in some flexibility to the current work around that. But I'll take that back to Form the Future as well, and just understand if there's something more specific that we could do within the remit of what we're currently doing.
Okay, that sounds like a Kristen Ann, sorry.
Thanks. I think the point, Neen, that you make on we're filling a gap, and that's the thing. It's really just very hard, though, as we've discussed, to get a sense of what the gap is and what the overall need is. And I wonder if a sort of push for this board, maybe to ask the skills, and then to have a sort of formal with the combined, what do they think the gap is? And then we can look at that then in the skills working group and come back to this board, because I think it's that sense of we could be more ambitious, but is it overlapping versus actually what I struggle to see is a really clear, this is the problem, but I'm still hearing a huge gap in STEM. I'm hearing a huge challenge in just some of the really entry-level roles for all the life science companies and the university and the hospitals. There's a sense that there's, and I know we can only feel a little bit of it, but some sort of confidence of how's the rest being tackled, and that could be something to look at if this board was to then sort of give that remit to the skills committee. Maybe then the combined authority will come and say, well, this is where we see the needs. I don't know what people think.
Okay, thank you, Kristen Ann. So, I mean, it certainly sounds right to me that we need to avoid running the risk of responding to the latest shortage we heard about, assuming all the others have been satisfied, but we need a holistic view, is your point, I think. Simon.
I just wanted to link back to the construction industry and civils in particular, because the GCP is going to be letting some very hefty contracts in that specific sector of the construction industry. And so it would make sense to, in the procurement process, to look to link the training, recruitment and training effort that the contractors are going to put in order to increase the supply of people with appropriate skills to deliver the programmes. And I know that there's quite a lot of contracts going to be, or planned to be let in 2025, and therefore development of the apprenticeship programme in advance of that would make sense. And of course, it would come through a partnership between the GCP and the contractors and the training providers. Would seem to me a kind of like a win-win-win kind of intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I have no other hands, so Niamh, would you like to comment on those points?
Yeah, so there will be specific targets baked into contracts, absolutely.
Thank you. Going on to the next section now. Now, the SMART workstream report is married with the item we've got later, and I suggest we keep focus on that to the later item. So turn the page over, come to Appendix 4, which is the housing workstream. Is there any comment on that? Okay, so let's go to item Appendix 5, which is the economy and environment workstream. And this, in this section, is where we have the question of funding for the work on the local economy that you described earlier, Niamh, on which the board is going to be asked to make a decision at its next meeting. Okay. Are there any contributions on any of that? Katie?
Yes, I think 11.16 refers to the strong, the strong K1 companies and how they dealt with what they went through in the pandemic and since, but also reflects on the non-K1 companies and how they are struggling and continue to struggle. And this actually picks up the previous conversations about where we have lack of skills in certain parts of our economy. But the information, the detailed information about this is really amazing, and it's really clear that the trickle-down wealth that will not happen nationally will not happen locally as well. So there needs to be real support for the non-K1 businesses, and that will actually impact all of us. The K1 companies need the non-K1 companies. We need to be much, much more balanced somehow. So this is a snapshot of what is happening, but doesn't deal with the underlying issues. But as politicians, we need to do that. And I really recommend that the background to this is actually comes to all of us again, perhaps somehow. And it feeds into our anti-poverty strategy, it feeds into housing strategy, feeds into education, agriculture, all of that. It shows it so clearly that we need to be more balanced in this area to be successful for everyone. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I think it's KI.
KI.
KI. We knew what you meant. We knew what you meant.
Claire's point from earlier.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So, yes, I have Kristen Ann now. Yeah.
Thank you. Just one, I mean, this is a very useful work and I fully endorse it. I just, maybe also a question to the council. There does seem to be sometimes how these figures are used and who uses them and whether these are the moments of truth, and you get government using different figures in different reports. There's basically been an art skill report that used a different set of numbers, etc. My question would be, what could be done, do we think, to, if we believe in these numbers, to make sure that they're used at least more broadly within our communities and within our councils, and these are the numbers that are accepted as the ones of truth and that we're working towards, because otherwise we're always looking at a picture that we say, well, that's right, but we are dealing with bodies externally or even within our own political landscape that are using different figures.
Thank you. Okay, so I had those two contributions. Perhaps I could just add one of my own on the back of what Katie was saying. So the non-KI sector is obviously quite a broad one. The spectrum is large, perhaps larger than KI itself. My supposition would be that those parts of the non-KI sector that were supporting the KI sector may be doing less badly than ones that are rather more distanced in relationship. And I'm just wondering whether you can shed any light on whether that is the case and what level of breakdown we have within the non-KI field to show us which part of it is worst performing and which part of it is best performing.
Thank you, Chair. If I take those in order, just around the single point of truth, I suppose, as officers, thinking of going into a kind of gateway review scenario and engaging with government, as you and I did yesterday on the biomedical campus, etc. Certainly, as officers, I think we'd really support that idea of and we share these numbers with partners quite often. And we that's why we're asking you to continue supporting it. We think it's a really good, robust data set. Around, Tim, to your point, around which bits of the non-KI sectors are more directly supporting KI sectors. So we do have a really good breakdown of non-KI sectors through the research that's already been done. And there's some really great slide packs that have been circulated, but I will recirculate after this. But what I don't know, but what I think we can do if the Joint Assembly wants to support the next phase of work, is to work with the Centre for Business Research and ask if Centre for Business Research and ask if they can more directly bring that point out in the next series of reports and see what they can come up with.
Thank you very much. Claire?
Just a small point on this which may illuminate slightly. Knowledge-intensive businesses very often employ a huge number of non-knowledge workers, if you see what I mean. So whilst they tend to have a pinnacle of very high knowledge people in there, they do employ a huge pyramid of all of us. So they are one of the reasons that Cambridge and the surrounding area is so high growth and has been so resilient through hard times. So I think it's very easy to think of them all being software engineers, but they're not. There's a huge pyramid.
Thanks very much for that. Seeing no other... Sorry, Heather?
It's just an observation from the way it's gone, and it's not criticism because we all fall into it. But I just sat here and I thought, if any member of the public's watching this, they're not likely to have a clue what we've just been talking about in KI, K1, K this, K that. And I'm just wondering if perhaps we could do some work to make our contributors a bit more accessible, I suppose, and also make it quite clear that we appreciate all levels of knowledge and input. It does feel sometimes that because of the terminology that we use, we're sort of saying, clever people, not so clever people. And I know that's not what we're intending. There's no one in this room that would have that intention. But it is an easy assumption for some to make. And if we could maybe look at that just to make it more accessible. Thanks.
I think that's a point that we've already noted, but well underlined. Thank you for doing that. And yes, it's an expression which is very open to the interpretations that aren't intended. So yeah, very good. So on that question of the continued funding for the research on the local economy, I heard no views against that, and I'm some in favour of the value of it, and would like to suggest that we encourage the board to proceed with that on that basis. Simon, Was it a different point from that, or because we don't need to say the same
I just
again?
wanted to, I mean, I'd have to declare an interest in this because my whole career has been spent in employment land planning. And one of the main problems about employment land planning is, of course, data. And this is the best set of data I've ever seen. So I really commend it.
Good reinforcement. So let's draw a line under the quarterly progress report. Thank you, Niamh, for helping us with that. And move on to the next item, which is item 7, which requires a little navigation. So we have 2 public questions, which I'm going to take first. I'm going to ask officers to respond. We're then going to refer to the petition that we received. Then I'm going to ask the officers to present their report, and then we're going to have our debate. So first of all, then, I need the questions to be asked. And Linda Wharf, I think, is asking the first question. Go ahead, Linda. Press the button on the right.
Okay, so my name's Linda Worth. I'm the County Access and Bridleways Officer for the British Horse Society. The BHS represents the interests of horse riders in the UK. Currently, there are 119,000 active members of the BHS itself. So, regarding the greenways, we very much appreciate the GCP's confirmation that the Assembly is being asked to approve hardtops alongside bridleways, not on them. The M11 bridge at Coton is already a bridleway. The surface improvements have changed the perception of its status and created conflict. Cyclists, and apparently the GCP, believe it is now a cycle path. Please can bridleways on the greenway routes be clearly marked, including the right-of-way hierarchy, which protects pedestrians and equestrians. The section to the north of Canterlope Road is already a bridleway. Design approval for this section must be suitable for equestrians. The Barton Long Road Junction. We appreciate inclusion, but without design drawings, there is a lack of clarity of what is to be approved. Please could approval be subject to BHS agreement? Signage for quiet roads should include pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians. With cyclists on their inside, for safety, horse riders will migrate towards the centre of the carriageway. Current plans to narrow carriageways to create cycle access will reduce and even remove the opportunity for vehicles to overtake. Travelling at about 4 miles per hour in walk and the highway code requirement for traffic to slow to 10 miles an hour when they see a horse, horses in the traffic flow risk queues quickly forming with attendant driver frustration and potential danger. Have these impacts been given consideration in the decision to exclude horses from safe cycling provision? Equestrians, as highway non-motorised users, have equal legal rights to cyclists. Exclusion is discriminatory and at odds with the highway code and road user hierarchy. Inclusive signage and crossing design, which has space for facilities for tandem, trike, recumbent, cargo, and child trail bicycles will allow inclusion for horses. Please consider the consequences on traffic flow, the safety of horses, their riders, and other road users when making your decisions today. But while I have the opportunity, I also want to say a massive thank you for including us, including equestrians on the Hildresham Crossing. I rode it last weekend, and it's a wonderful facility for the 100 or so horses located in the Abingtons, and as well as those in further afield. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. We will respond to that in a moment, but I'm just going to take the second public question, which is from CamCycle, and it's going to be asked by Josh Grantham. Hi, Josh.
Hi everybody, I'm Josh. I'm the infrastructure campaigner for CamCycle, a local cycling charity with over 1,600 members. We thank members and officers for their work on the greenways. We know these schemes are very popular and local people are impatient to get these routes completed, so they've got safer routes from, to and between Cambridge and surrounding villages. With one question on today's agenda, we'd like to make out the point that modal filters are an effective, low-cost way of building essential links along greenways and connecting to greenways. For example, the report states the scope of the Comberton Greenway along Sidgwick Avenue is limited, but this is only the case because through traffic is still being prioritised over people walking, cycling and wheeling. This road is proposed to be filtered as part of the GCP's own road classification project. With the university support for change here, why not do it now? Introducing restricted access for vehicles between Grange Road and Ridley Hall Road would free up space to create a shared street for walking and cycling, which would particularly benefit disabled people who suffer the most from the current uneven, narrow footpaths. We believe the whole street should be a pedestrian and cycle zone with exemptions for disabled access, loading and local access, which should be reduced as much as reasonably possible. All pay and display parking should be removed. With active travel modes predicted to grow and the expansion of the West Cambridge site, Sidgwick Avenue is an important link. Let's make it a better street for everyone and a valued part of the Greenway. As a side note, there's no visitor cycle parking at this venue. So thanks.
Thank you, Josh. So those are the two public questions. I'm now going to turn to Peter Blake to deal with each of those in turn.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of Linda Wolf's question, as a general principle, we've agreed that the existing bridleway sections will remain as they are. And where we can, we will be extending the routes, the multipath user routes on the side. At locations where the width of the bridleways is not 3 metres, we'll be looking to extend them where we can acquire the land. We understand the status of the M11 bridge. We'll continue to work with BHS and other stakeholders on signage across the Greenways network. We've had responses on Barton Road, Long Road Junction from BHS and other stakeholders, and we look forward to continuing that dialogue as we get to the final designs, as you would expect, and as we've done on other sections of the Greenway. It isn't correct to suggest we're excluding anybody on greenways. We had the conversation at your last meeting of this assembly in terms of how we balance the different needs, and that's what we're seeking to do. We've given the commitment around enhancing where possible for all users, including horse riders, and that will continue through the process. Particularly important, I think, was Linda's final point around risk assessments, in that these things are risk assessed at various stages through the development and delivery process. So they're risk assessed at the concept design, at detailed design, and then at post-scheme delivery. And if there are issues raised at any of those stages for any user on a greenway, then we will respond as we're required to do in terms of that detailed design, in terms of that risk that's raised. Turning to the question from Josh at Camp Cycle, we are looking to rationalise parking in the vicinity of West Cambridge. We're looking on Adams Road, for example, to do that, and looking at planters and placemaking improvements along that section that we know is a heavily used cycle route for access to the West Cambridge side. We are suggesting improvements for Sidgwick Avenue. We'll continue to explore whether they can go further with Camp Cycle and the other stakeholder groups as part of this project. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I now am going to refer to the petition that I mentioned earlier, which relates to the first of the two greenways that we're going to talk about, the Comberton Greenway. I will read this out. Apparently there isn't anyone from from amongst the petitioners present, but I do think it needs we need all to be conscious of what it says anyway. If it's a petition from the Highfield Farm Touring Park on the Comberton Greenway proposals, calling for the Comberton Greenway to come down the west side of Long Road rather than the proposed east side. And it says, if the Greenway comes down the east side of Long Road, it will affect houses and businesses that have been there for hundreds of years, But if it comes down the west side, then it will be a safer route for cyclists, pedestrians and horses, as it will not cross any driveways or the busy entrance to the campsite. The west side would also link up to the already existing bridleway straight down to the housing estate, which will be the safer option as people will then not have to cross a busy main road to get to it. With the current planned route, this will cause flooding to houses, encourage rural crime as they will have easy access onto land, will affect 6 different landowners rather than just 2 on the east side and many more problems. By having the Greenway coming down the west side of Long Road, it can then link up to Branch Road, making an easier and safer route into the village of Comberton, as this leads straight to the doctors, dentists, schools, shop and all other amenities, rather than leading straight down onto another busy main road at the mini roundabout. So that is for your reference when we talk about the Comberton Greenway, and I think we probably would be looking to officers to help us understand the other side of that argument, if their proposal is for the other side of that argument. But I think the next thing was to ask Peter to present the report. I don't know whether you're going to do that inside your presentation. Thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and pick that up in the presentation, but I'm sure we'll get any questions. If not, can I firstly introduce my colleague just down the table, Thomas Fitzpatrick, who's going to answer any of your tricky, detailed questions that you bowl at me. This is the first in the series of promised detailed reports on the greenways that follow the public engagement that you and the board agreed to earlier in the year, focusing on Comberton and Haslingfield. It is designed to do a number of things. So we're reporting back on the engagement. We're reflecting the responses and whether we've responded to that in terms of making changes to the greenways or whether we're not. And that follows the request at previous joint assemblies to highlight areas that we're not. It is seeking to agree to the outline business case, which is a stepping stone to the full business case that will come back for a final decision. To agree to required planning applications, if necessary. There's a small number, very small number on these particular greenways, but permitted development applications, traffic regulation orders, section 25, 26 public rights of way orders, difference being whether we have landowner agreement or whether we don't. So that's the planning and consents process for delivering these things. It is seeking agreement for compulsory purchase powers if we're unable to get the agreement of land by agreement, and also outlines the programme of works, and particularly the works for 2023. So paragraph 2 sets out in particular sections 2.3, 2.4, the headline information in terms of the responses that we received as part of the engagement, the linkage to all of the responses and the consultation, the engagement reports are all available online. So the tables outline the issues that were received and the action that was taken, or indeed the decision not to progress with the action. So just taking under Long Road on page 105, the top of page 105, this raises the issue of the petition that we've received, and the officer recommendation is not to change with the previous proposals. The previous proposals ensure there's a direct link from the existing right-of-way bridleway on Whitwell Way to the proposed Barton Road spur. It avoids a number of residential properties located on the west side, and it negates the need to cross side roads, particularly Fox's Way and Harbour Avenue. And taken alongside the work that we're doing on Long Road to reduce traffic speeds and improve that environment anyway, actually we believe there'll be a much safer access and egress into the caravan park as a result of the proposals. So that's an area where we're proposing no change, Chair. And what those tables seek to do is to just outline whether we are or whether we're not making a change to the Greenway proposals as following the consultation. So in terms of 2.4, So on to the Haslingfield Greenway, just a couple of these details I just want to bring to your attention. One is the Bournebrook Crossing, where we are expecting there will be a requirement for a planning application. Further detailed design, as you would expect, is ongoing with that to work with the planning authorities, and we're also looking at the alignment to minimise the environmental impact, as you would expect. And then just turning over the page 110, which is 110 in British bonds, the Grantchester section. And so following the engagement, actually sort of support for the proposals in terms of the feedback we received following our engagement, the parish council are strongly against the proposals that run through the village. They've suggested we could use alternative alignments that already exist, and we are proposing, therefore, to take a final consultation on that, not engagement, it'll be a final consultation. We will produce detailed designs for the section through the village. One of the concerns raised was that we would be urbanising that environment, and I think it's important that we produce the information that suggests we don't need to urbanise that environment to deliver particular cycling improvements. But I think reflecting the concerns of the parish, we're proposing to have a particular consultation on that section, Chair. We then move to sort of paras 2.5 to 2.7 that outlines the planning and consents process. We think large parts of this will be undertaken by permitted development. We clearly need to work with the local planning authority just to ensure that that's the case and deal with that. And then work with landowners around the creation of new public rights of way, which will then give legal status and security to the Greenways network as we go forward, bless you. And then finally, just a reconfirmation that we will be using compulsory purchase, or that you are content that we use, that you allow me to wield a stick in terms of compulsory purchase powers if necessary, but we do hope to avoid that in terms of negotiations with landowners through the process. Paras 2.8 and 2.10 outline the outline business case. We are obliged to undertake outline business cases for our scheme as part of the city deal. We've previously talked to you about actually the network, the Greenways network is an amalgam of routes rather than individual routes. So we've produced it on a route basis, but I think when it comes back for your final consideration, you'll be asked to sign off the network, because actually the network benefits, it's more than the sum of its constituent parts, and I think it's important that we reflect that. And then finally, Chair, and I'll stop and try and answer any question, or rather Thomas might, is para 2.13 then just talks about the work that we're planning for 2023 as we move forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to suggest that we focus on each of these two greenways in turn. And then pick up any more general questions at the end. Are there any questions or points of view in relation to the Comberton Greenway, please? Yes.
It's about maintenance. Could I ask about the maintenance strategy for these two, and in fact all the greenways, and particularly under lighting materials and signage? Obviously there are discussions with the County Council on signage, but who will replace the signage when it falls down? Who will maintain the lights? Who will maintain the surface during the whole life of the greenways? What's the arrangement with the County Council?
Thanks, Claire Daunton. Now, Claire Ruskin.
I support, having looked into it in some detail, the officer's position on Long Road, and also on Grantchester, continuing that with detailed consultation, not engagement. The other comment I'd just like to plea for is some more dropped curbs, because I quite often miss the first one, and I could do with the second one in most roads. Thank you. I
think we've all been there, yeah. if yours, Heather, is a general one, I'm going to take those at the end. Paul? Okay, so any specific to this, any specific to the Comberton Greenway? Okay, well, I shall fill up the third slot of questions myself on this then. At the end of the tabulation, there are sections on lighting, materials and signage. And in the way each of those, in the commentary for each of those, which is actually in common with the second one as well, it's spoken that there will be a general strategy across all greenways in relation to lighting, materials and signage, differentiating the approach according to the territory that they're in. And I wanted to ask whether that being a strategy of some breadth is something that we would have sight of at this assembly and have the ability to comment on. Peter, would you like to take that and the other two questions?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we're happy to bring the lighting, materials and signage strategy to the Assembly. So in terms of maintenance, the city deal envisaged that this stuff would be built and then the relevant authority, the Highways Authority, would take them over. We have spoken, certainly I have spoken on numerous occasions that we are working with county council colleagues to establish a maintenance strategy rather than just throwing a liability at the county council. Those conversations continue. Those conversations are challenging for a whole host of reasons, but as I've said previously, we are going to find a way of making sure that there is an appropriate maintenance strategy for, once these things are delivered, because it's incredibly important that they are managed and maintained. And at the same time, it's incredibly important not just to throw a problem in the county council. Is that, it's not an answer, but there's a process and we're going through the process.
Let Peter answer the rest of the questions and then you can come back.
I think the other one was drop curbs. Was that which we're happy to explore as part of general access arrangements. We want these things to be accessible. That's the point. And so those sort of examples and very detailed examples of saying we'd like something here or something, that really adds value to the schemes. That's why we continue with our discussions with stakeholder groups, because we recognise getting that final design right is really quite important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just going to ask Claire, you don't have to come back, but...
I will, thank you. And thanks, Peter, for that answer. I just do think it's really important. I mean, we've seen what happens when paths are not properly maintained, when there's weeds growing over the solar lighting. And I just want to be sure that we keep it on the agenda and also that we have a time frame. Is it 20 years, 50 years? Over what period is the maintenance plan? Yeah.
Thanks, Claire. Neil?
Just very quickly on broadly, thank you very much, Peter, for that. We are obviously very, very interested in maintenance going forward and the cost of that. A point about equestrians, we're expecting the numbers to increase, and there was a change in the road hierarchy, which has kind of come in the middle of this, so that we have pedestrians, equestrians, and then cyclists, and there are quite a few safety questions around more isolated rural parts of these, and we see that equestrians actually help. They are more traffic in that region, and there are even some groups that support the, I forget what it's called, rural crime units that help in other parts of the county. The other things I'd like to mention is the ongoing work that I know that you are doing to have this in line with what's going on in the other parts of the county. As far as lighting technology is something that is changing very, very quickly. And we, of course, in terms of maintenance and everything, we want to be joined up with the combined authority and the county. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Annika.
Thank you, Chair. My question is again regarding the maintenance, just to say that you're saying at the moment you're going through the process of understanding how maintenance is going to be delivered moving forward. What about the cycleways that have been delivered and have been said to be finished? How are they going to be maintained now?
Thank you. Peter?
So we work these things up with the relevant statutory agency, which is the County Council. So actually an important point, Neil, that I missed earlier on is we don't just develop our own lighting proposals or surface proposals. We talk very closely with county colleagues because we recognise not just the maintenance liability, but that the consistency approach is really important across, you know, the sort of wider patch. There is a formal transfer over of these schemes to the County Council when they're concluded and everything's signed off and the post safety analysis is undertaken and any tweaks or anything is sort of put to bed and dealt with, then the County Council will pick up the responsibility for that as the highway authority for the area. That's part of the city deal, that's part of the statutory sort of responsibilities of the County Council. What we are trying to do is we're trying to come up with a solution that says we don't just pass a financial problem onto the County Council. Yeah? The Executive Board is a statutory joint committee of the County Council. County Council as the highway authority signed the city deal. But what we need to try and recognise is that putting this stuff in is great. It needs to be maintained, but what we don't need to do is just to add to the financial burden. So those conversations are going to continue. The length of time of the maintenance period is going to be, you know, one of the hot topics to talk about, because obviously the longer you do it, the greater the financial challenge. But you know, we have to get all these things on the table and have those honest conversations. The GCP is not a maintaining authority. So it's not something that can fall within our bailiwick. We do not employ people or pay contractors to do this. So getting that process right and then getting it future-proofed is incredibly important, and that's why those conversations are going to continue.
Thank you, Peter. I've got Katie next. Oh, do you want to come back on that point, Kate? Oh.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. So at the moment, if you have a cycleway at this point that needs maintenance, what happens with it? You're saying there's discussions, but there's nothing, you don't seem to be answering the
responsibility falls to the respective authority, which is the highway authority. So the highway authority is responsible for maintaining them once the schemes have been concluded. What we're trying to do, is to say we recognise the financial challenge that brings as part of all of the city deal works, not just the Greenways network, the Cycling Plus network, any future busways, and all. How can we support county council colleagues with the financial cost of delivering that maintenance?
I understand all that, but for example, if you have a cycleway that needs maintenance now, how do you find out if it has been passed over, and how do you find out if the relevant health and safety checks have been done and finalised, and you can now say, I need this cycle path to have maintenance?
Sorry.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking of one example. Reynolds Drove, there are issues with the surfacing. People are saying that some maintenance is required, but nobody knows who to go to.
In that instance, if you come to me, then I will resolve it. But the process has to be very clear because this is multi-party. Once the schemes are completed and signed off, and the post-scheme safety checks have been concluded, then there is a line drawn and the responsibility passes to the highway authority to maintain. What we're trying to do is to ensure that we don't bowl any further financial problems to the highway authority, because they're the ones with the capability to do it, but there's a financial pressure of doing it, and those conversations are going to continue.
Okay. So it sounds to me that what the point that's being made is that it would be very helpful for everyone to be completely clear when we're moving into the maintenance ongoing phase and when the GCP has backed out of the development phase.
And I will take that as an action, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, I was coming to Katie.
Just following on from that, I was the councillor for Trumpington when they have the track next to the guided busway. And actually, I found that with maintenance problems, the county council were very receptive and came out and would look at issues with me. The foliage was a contract that was with the city council, and they would deal with it twice a year. But again, they were very receptive if something was causing a particular problem. The real difficulty was the lighting. I had to end up going to the director of the maintenance contractor to get some feedback on the lighting. But once I knew who to speak to, they were quite receptive. But that was a struggle getting that. But once you knew, things did happen in the right order. My question is about biodiversity on the greenways. Is the commitment for 20% net gain covered on the greenways, and will that be done in an appropriate way where we increase or support nature where it's special rather than just generally improving biodiversity? Will it be focused on areas that help with nature recovery? Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Alex?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Peter, for all your work you are doing with maintenance. I'm sure a lot of people will already be aware here, but the government funds the Highways Department for maintaining roads, A, B and C roads, but no funding for active travel routes. So that's why adding all of these active travel routes obviously adds the maintenance burden, but doesn't give us any extra funding to be able to help them out. So it's something we, obviously, as a Highways Department, are working with central government on to try and change that. And I do thank you for your help in the meantime to try and ease the burden of that as it goes forwards, because it is a big challenge that we have, and it is where we also find challenges around lighting and other things, because all of that does not come with any extra funding. I also just, while I'm saying thank you, want to say thank you for your work on the greenways. I think everything we hear here about people wanting to improve them is simply because everybody is so looking forward to them. So I don't think we should kind of gloss over the fact of how important these greenways are to people, and how positive it is that the GCP are doing them, and how happy people are about having them, even if everybody has many comments about exactly how they should be done. So I think that's important to say. There were a couple of points I did want to raise there. Firstly, the County Council is obviously working on a surface design guide. I believe you are working with the County Council on that surface design guide. Can we ensure that whatever surfaces are put down here, that they are aligned with what the County Council is doing there? My second point is around shared use. It was really useful, by the way, getting the maps at the second half of this with those bits on them. I have to admit, when I first looked at this and read Long Road, I was thinking Long Road next to me, not really thinking the other Long Road. So I was very used to have that in a map and actually have that confirmed. But I noticed there's a lot of shared use in these designs, and shared use at the moment is causing issues across the city. It's one of those areas where we see pedestrians and particularly cyclists coming into conflict, in a few cases equestrians as well. So can we ensure that with these we limit the amount of shared use where possible, but where we do put shared use in, we do try and go above and beyond, making it even wider than we have to, making sure that it is incredibly clearly defined that it is shared use. Across the city we have problems right now where a lot of our shared use is not very clear, so cyclists will not take a particular pavement because they don't realise it's shared use, but at the same point pedestrians will get mowed down because they don't realise the pavement they're on is actually shared use. So wherever we have it, we need to make sure it's very clearly defined and in a way that is visible to cyclists and pedestrians. We have a habit of putting road signs up, and unfortunately pedestrians have a habit of not reading road signs because they're just not used to that as a pedestrian. So can we make sure where we are doing shared use that it is very clear to people, we do as little of it as possible, and we make sure it's of as higher quality as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And the third one is Heather.
Thank you. Just something that hopefully helps clarify from earlier. So it's the RCAT, is the Rural Crimes Action Team that you were looking for. I just think if we are talking about rural crime, it's important to distinguish between rural crimes and crime that happens in rural areas, because they are two very different things. So the RCAT unit would go to a rural crime, but other police would be involved if it was a crime that happened in a rural area, if that helps, Chair.
I'm sure it does. Thank you. Okay, Peter, would you like to respond to those three from Katie, Alex?
I'll do my best, Chair. So in terms of Katie's question, your first question about commitment to delivering it, yes. The second question I'm going to leave to you in your considerations of the report that's on your on this agenda for later on in terms of how that happens.
Sorry, which one was that? I was just...
The biodiversity net gain report,
we'll wait
which I
till
think
that
is
item.
talking about or your ambition and how we might deliver on that. In terms of Alex's question, yeah, we would endorse the views. Shared space is not a policy objective. Shared spaces, we have to do it because we're limited by access to typically highway or available land or anything else, and we'll certainly take away clearly demarked and defined space because we do recognise the challenges. It is slightly different in a rural area than an urban area because the pressures are a bit less, but we do entirely take the point. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Paul then and Simon.
Yeah, so it is a general point that's relevant to both greenways, which is, well, first thing I'd like to say is obviously there's been a huge amount of work gone into analysing all the consultation responses and working out how to respond to them. I suppose one difficulty I have is I struggle to, from all the information, work out the quality of the design and what the impact of the proposed changes will be to the quality. And by quality, I mean attractiveness of routes to all users, all non-motorised users. And I was thinking about this and thinking, so how is quality often measured? It's measured against standards and it's measured against guidelines. And I wondered whether it's possible to, there are guidelines. For instance, there's LTM 120 for cycling. I'm sure there are standards for equestrians as well. And I wondered if it would be possible to do some work looking at the extent to which it's meeting the guidance of LTN 120 or other standards. For instance, maybe on a section-by-section basis, to what degree does it meet that guideline or standards that are in place? And we might be able to track also, as the design progresses, whether it's kind of deviating away from the guidance or it's gradually progressing towards that guidance and hence, hopefully, achieving a higher standard. Because just reading all of that, I couldn't, and I don't know the areas, I couldn't determine the quality of what's being proposed. So that's a suggestion. I don't know whether it's possible or not. The other question, the other point I had was around the involvement of the County Council Highways, and I think it's linked to what a lot of other people have said here, is to what extent have they been involved in the design so far and the proposed changes? Because my experience to date with other schemes has been that because of maintenance pressures, that has an impact on the design and reduces the quality of the designs. And that is quite problematic. So, yeah, comments rather than questions.
Thank you, Paul. Simon?
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on the point of lighting. And I noticed in the consultation responses you've had over 200 people collected over the two schemes comment on it. And I just wanted to talk about my personal experience about going on dual use footway cycle path that's unlit. And it's actually it's sort of completely in line with what Alex is saying, is that as a cyclist you can get within 3 or 4 metres of a pedestrian without actually seeing them. As a pedestrian, you can get within 3 or 4 metres of a cyclist coming along and you don't know which direction they're going to go in. And so it kind of makes the path kind of rather dangerous to be on. And the stud lighting just doesn't cut it. It does need either low level or full level lighting. So if these greenways are going to be fully utilised during the winter, they're going to need proper lighting, frankly. And I'm sure that the team will look to evidence base data to align the lighting with the particular circumstances. But to leave them unlit, I don't think is going to be. But we won't get full utilisation out of the investment.
Thank you, Simon. Annika?
Thank you. My comments are about the general, both greenways. The maps are a great feature where you've indicated where there's quiet roads and shared use paths and things. My question is this communicated showing the benefits for the community as a whole for the cycle paths? For example, where you've indicated there are 20-mile-an-hour zones on the quiet paths. How well is that communicated as a benefit for the villages that these paths are proposed to go through? And if these are shown more to the wider community, it might enable them to see what benefits this can give to them.
Okay, and Katie, you had a related point to Simon's point, I think.
I believe that when the initial busways were put in, there was a Busways Act, and in that act there's the ability to put in bylaws for the tracks, and I don't believe any bylaws have ever been considered for these tracks, because we can talk about all sorts of behaviour guidance, maybe Heather knows, but without a bylaw, how can we enforce anything? So it needs to be who does that, and has it been done, and can it be done?
Okay, so that's a batch of questions. I think the question is...
Heather's got a question.
Yeah, I know, but we've already got 4 this time, so I'm coming back.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So I think in terms of Paul's challenge, we can do something if you can, in terms of the LTN 120 compliant, or just let me have a think about what it is we can do. We need to balance workloads, and also it needs to be, whatever we produce needs to be meaningful so that we can either draw conclusions from it or then manage and maintain it. So there's something in there, and we'll come back with a proposition. I entirely would endorse your sort of view around highways. We do have the conversation with highways colleagues. Quite rightly, they are challenging on designs because they don't want gold-plated, because gold-plated has then got to be maintained. But that then comes back to exactly why we're trying to get a maintenance regime. And what we mean by maintenance regime is the funding to maintain these to the right standards, because there's an expectation out there, I think, in terms of the Greenways network that we're trying to meet. And actually just going to the sort of cheap and cheerful end is probably not going to cut it. So we need to focus on that quality, but also we need to focus on those discussions with county colleagues as to how we deliver it. Simon, as a general principle, lighting, yes, is very important. I have to say that lighting is not universally supported. Yeah, and there is a balance on, particularly on some of the locations. We need to think about, these are rural areas, and in terms of night sky, in terms of urban, we just need to get the look and feel right. So these things absolutely need to be safe, which is why we have a safety process. Recognise the point around lighting, but I think we need to continue the dialogue, certainly at a local level, to get that balance right. Annika, I think the engagement we've just gone through has demonstrated that when we go out and talk to people, there is broad support and they see the benefits. I think there's more we can now do, having concluded the engagement, if there's sign-off from the board on these sort of final set of proposals, then in terms of then making sure that information goes out and people are clear on that. But certainly in terms of the feedback we had with these two greenways, it was very well received. There were lots of sort of detailed questions, as you would imagine, and detailed as sort of design issues, but actually the general principles of what they would deliver was sort of supported. And finally, Katie, in terms of bylaws, I mean, we're focusing on public right-of-way and bridleways as the mechanism through which both to use the planning and consents process to get these things in, but also get them managed, maintained and looked after appropriately. We're not looking at bylaws at the moment. That may be something that people want to reflect on in the future. We're just trying to make sure that there is a sound legal basis for these things to ensure that they can be appropriately managed, maintained and utilised going forward.
Thanks, Peter. Last comment from Heather.
Thank you, Chair. This is my general point, which
I
because we seem
recognised
to have
some time
drifted
ago
this-
that people have been making their general points, but I'm going to call Comberton to order in a moment. So
So shall I make my general point now?
I would
as
prefer
everyone's
not,
had?
actually, because I can then get to the.
I will continue to be very patient while you've permitted
you are,
others
your
to ask their
patience is
general
noted,
question.
Heather. That's very kind of you. So, Comberton. We've been talking about the Comberton Greenway. In fact, most people have not, well, no one has referred to any detail of the Comberton Greenway. So, I'm kind of coming to the view based on that no one has any objection to the actions taken specified in the commentary to the various points raised. And that includes the point related to the petition on the east-west side of Long Road. I have heard no one argue against any of the actions proposed, so I'm going to suggest that is our feedback to the board, which I think is the feedback that they're really hoping for, but we've got a lot of other feedback as well. That's great. I'm then going to turn to the other Greenway. Was there any specific on here that anyone wanted to refer to? Good. Kristen.
It's a clarification question on the Hazelingfield one, and I think it relates, Peter, probably to your point about network. How do these two join up? Because there is a route that joins up between Barton and the east end of Grantchester. Is there an assumption that that join is already there, so isn't part of the Greenways network?
Yes,
is that's what?
It's only hands together as a network.
So the assumption is that that's already there and in good stead, which is why we don't need to consider any work on the join.
Or improvements will be made as part of the network.
There's a link between the Hazelingfield and Comberton Greenways via the Barton Greenway, which is in the middle of the two. So, and that has just started to go out for engagement now and will be coming to this group and the board in March.
Okay. So I didn't see still any comments about any of the other details, so I assume the situation is the same as for the Comberton one in that we are not raising any objections to the actions that officers are proposing to take. I haven't forgotten, Heather, but I'm just turning to page 115, where we've got in section 4 the focal points that the board is going to decide on. Are there any points in relation to that? And is your comment, Heather, related to those in section 4? Okay, do your thing now, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was just the compulsory purchase orders was referenced when you said about and the powers. That's obviously something that everyone wants to have as an ultimate last resort and to not use if needed. But if it is to be used, could we feedback that I think it really should be this sort of elected board decision to whether you take a compulsory purchase order based on the information that officers have provided as opposed to an officer decision, because it is such a sort of a key point and a very controversial element of the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Heather. Peter?
We're just trying to remember the exact word. We've definitely been to the board for a decision on compulsory purchase orders around the Greenways network, so we'll just check the wording and the delegations that were given as part of that.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just think when you've managed to identify which properties will be affected, I do think it should be a board decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Noted. So, going back to section 4 on page 115, 4.1 we have effectively said okay to by having no objection to the actions proposed. I'm concluding, therefore, that we have no objection to the board proceeding to prepare a full business case for these two greenways and to make the various applications that are necessary to enable it to happen. There have been no comments on the programme of delivery that is identified, So I'm assuming there were no objections to those either. And we are really saying take this to the next stage in total, just to round that off. I don't see any challenges to any of that, but we did have some very good general points, I would say, which probably will reverberate through this and other schemes. And I think in particular, getting those 3 strategies in front of us will give more confidence in relation to the detail of these and future schemes. So thanks very much, everyone, for that discussion. Claire.
I wouldn't like us to be seen as a passive board here. I think we have I certainly positively endorse the work that the officers have done on this. It's an active decision, having looked into it, not a passive. We didn't make any comments. Thank you.
Just while we're getting that ready, I'll introduce my colleague Daniel Clark, who's also going to be doing some of the presentation and answering the difficult questions, as is the arrangement normally here.
Great. Over to you. Go ahead. Start when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this paper has come forward following a request from the Joint Assembly at its June meeting for a fuller report than you normally get in the quarterly report. So that's the background to it. We'd like Joint Assembly to consider the proposals to be presented to Executive Board, in particular to note the progress of Smart Cambridge since its inception, in terms of supporting the GCP objectives, and comment on the forward programme as an input to the budget process. So, thank you. So the paper is structured under a number of key themes. So the detail is in the paper, but the first one is better data, and there are a whole host of things under that general heading. So just by way of example, we've trialled and deployed some new types of sensor to provide more granular data about vehicle movements, and one of the neat things about it is it doesn't identify specific vehicles, which is obviously important for public confidence. And the data that we have collected and continue to collect is an important source of information for making investment decisions about where the important priorities are, but also the assessment of schemes once they're delivered. Moving on to the second theme, this slide, please, thank you. So making sustainable transport easier. A lot of this is about some foundational work so that we can make better data available to travellers. Now, there is still a lot of work to do on this, and I think people are very aware of some of the limitations of our data, and we can come to that in a moment. But, for example, feeding better data into journey planning apps like Google Maps and that kind of thing, but also experimenting with new ways of presenting data. So having buses moving on screens and things like this to try and make it more accessible. There's still a lot to do under this theme, but the idea is that ultimately this supports getting people out of their cars and onto buses and so on. So the next theme is better operation of the highway. So, for example, things like the work we're doing at the moment to trial some smart signal technology, the aim of which is to use artificial intelligence, to make better use of road space.
The next theme, enabling the next generation of public transport. So our work really is trying to look to the future so that our investments in busways and so on can be thinking about more modern technologies. So this really relates to things like looking at the next generation beyond the curb guidance that we have on the current Cambridgeshire guided busway, thinking about how we can improve on that using sensor guidance, but also looking at autonomous vehicles, and Dan's going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. And then finally, the final theme is enabling smart communities. So the work here is centred around supporting the shared planning service with policies to encourage no and low car communities. And Dan's going to also explain how we work with colleagues to improve digital connectivity to new and existing communities. So overall, our work is clearly trying to support the delivery of GCP investments, helping us to future-proof the significant investments we make. We've been quite successful in gaining external funding, and again, Dan will talk about that in a moment. And we also collaborate very broadly with public and private sector organisations, and that collaboration is sometimes just pooling things can make them more effective and cheaper, but also bringing in the expertise and investment from private sector organisations. And finally, a lot of what Smart Cambridge does enables us to showcase the sorts of work we're doing, which is sort of creates a bit of a virtuous circle because it enhances our reputation, and that in its own way can help to bring further investment into the area, often from private sector companies, but through bid works we do to central government and so on. So for the next slide, please, I'm just going to hand over to Dan.
Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a bit about some of the work that Smart Cambridge have done with other programmes, such as Connecting Cambridgeshire, to ensure that we are joining up opportunities to future-proof infrastructure schemes and making the most of digital opportunities. Examples of this are integrating ducting for fibre in new schemes, which can be used by the market to provide connectivity. This has an advantage of generating savings compared to retrofitting ducting, saving about 4 tonnes of CO2 per kilometre of ducting laid, extending gigabit-capable fibre, and helping to address issues of digital inclusion. When replacing lighting columns, we can ensure they are future-proofed and able to support infrastructure that provides better connectivity, which helps the delivery of our schemes and travellers who need things like better real-time information. So, next slide, please. An example of a project that delivers some of the benefits that Debbie outlined earlier is the autonomous vehicle work that we've been doing. So it supports the delivery of GCP objectives by exploring the role autonomy can play in the transport system and how we can future-proof infrastructure schemes to be able to take advantage of these technologies as they become more market-ready. To carry out the pilot, we built an external collaboration with business, and that was the vehicle manufacturer, academic partnership with the University of Cambridge, and central government through the Department for Transport and a body that they sponsor called the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles. And the strength of this partnership and our vision for how autonomous vehicles could be deployed in Cambridge helped to secure approximately £3.5 million in government funding. The trial was delivered successfully and gathered national and international attention, enhancing the reputation of our area as a place that is pushing the boundaries and exploring technological solutions to our transport issues.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So just looking forward to the programme to March 2024. So I wasn't going to go through this in detail, but we've got some activities that are ongoing. For example, I mentioned some of the data work we do and the data challenges. I think in some ways that's a never-ending piece of work. So that will continue on some specific projects. We have got some trials and early deployments that will conclude during the period to March 2024. So the stage of work we're doing at the moment on smart signals trials will conclude in this period. There's a lot of the work we do supports the city access work stream programme, and we're expecting in the next stage to be continuing to lead some of the work streams there, in particular the sort of systems technology operations work stream, and also some elements of behaviour change, particularly where those rely on technology solutions. So it's kind of continuing a theme about making public transport easier to use. And finally, we certainly plan to continue our work on autonomous vehicles. Exactly what that looks like depends a bit, because we've made 2 bids to the latest round of connected and autonomous vehicle funding, and we await with bated breath to see whether we've been successful. If we have been successful in one or both of those, that's going to be a major thrust of our work. If we're not successful, all is not lost, because we have built a lot of kind of networks and connections in this area. So we'll be planning to work with the successful bidders. So the final point on this slide is just the point that we can plan and we do plan, but we have to remain somewhat agile. And that's for a number of reasons. One is that the needs of GCP sort of change as GCP moves through its overall programme, but also new opportunities come up, and sometimes those come because of government funding. Sometimes, quite frequently in fact, we're approached by private sector organisations who are keen to invest either time, money or both in this area. And then we often have a judgment about whether we want to work with those people. You know, does it align with what GCP is trying to achieve overall? So there is this need to retain some sense of agility and flexibility in the programme over the next 18 months and beyond. So thank you very much. That was our kind of summary of the paper. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I'm going to ask anyone who has a question or a view. Karen?
Thank you. I guess I've got some comments and also a specific question, if that's okay. Yeah, so thank you, Debbie and Dan, for the overview. It's very helpful to hear about the ongoing work. I think I asked a question at the last meeting more around behavioural change and where that was sitting in the GCP, because I think from my perspective, this is a key part of what we need to do, is to encourage people to change their behaviours, particularly in relation to their transport modes that they use. And I think I was told that this was part of the SMART programme. I guess I'm not seeing a massive amount of input at the moment on early stage thinking about that when we're thinking about how I guess thinking about how we scope new schemes, how we plan for them, and then how we actually deliver them, in terms of thinking really about the psychology aspects of how people change their behaviours and what we can do using technology and data to help them potentially do that. So I'd like to ask you how you're getting that expertise and evidence into the planning, and I'm talking about from the very early stages as well of scoping, beginning to scope a new scheme. And also thinking about how we communicate about our schemes as well, and how we engage people in that vision that we want to create, so the behavioural change aspects of that. That was my sort of general comment, because it picks up, I think, from the questions. I do have a specific question, and I don't know about the process. So some of us received an email in relation to the totem. Is it okay to ask about the response? Because Debbie, I think you got that email as well. Because I think it is important to address that, because it probably undermines confidence and trust in some of the technologies and the services as well, and also in the transparency of the reporting. So it would be helpful if you could address the issues raised in that email as well, please.
Thanks, Karen. I'm not sure I have either. But,
So it was from the secretary of the Cambridge Bus Users Group. I don't know if it went to everybody. We got it yesterday, some of us.
I was copied on that.
So maybe you can tell us something about it when we come back to you in a moment. I've got Katie next.
I'd just like to thank the team. I think this is such a huge and important topic, and it could be expanded to fill all of our time. And I think what you've achieved with the team you've got is just amazing. And I really do hope that we can get more funding to ensure that these really important projects continue. Just want to make a few points. One is I'm very pleased to hear about the future-proofing transport and how we may, looking forward now to affect our decisions, looking forward to affect our decisions now. And I think the work on sensor guidance is really important when we talk about the busways. You know, should we be talking about them as transport routes rather than busways? Because in the future there may not be buses, they may be mass transit solutions, because we don't know what's happening. And the specification for what goes in now has to allow for that in the future. I think that's really good. I think you talked about planning for low or no car communities and the connected communities. That's really very, very important, and that's what we're looking at in the emerging local plan. And I think that the emerging local plan, it will maybe submitted in 2024 and maybe adopted in 2025, so it's some time on. And I think some of your examples that you're talking about could really help the emerging local plan, because they are good things to refer to. And I also think that you were talking about aligning ticketing and things, and what we're talking about buses and bus routes. And I think if we can align bus ticketing with train ticketing, even if it's not possible, if we actually spoke out that this is an aspiration, that might enable it to help happen in the future, as well as bus timetabling, aligning with train timetabling. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. Helen?
Firstly, thanks for the update, and sorry that I haven't been to the last couple of working group meetings, but there obviously is a lot still going on. My question really relates to, this is a good vehicle for updating everybody here, but I don't think we've done much external communication lately, and I've seen social media traffic that suggested that our sort of optimising the traffic signals was actually a deliberate attempt to create congestion so that we can then introduce a congestion charge, which suggests that it would be quite a good idea to sort of demystify some of this stuff and perhaps share with the public the good intentions and good results rather than the malign intentions that have been implied. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much for the feedback. So I think picking up Karen's initial point about behaviour change, Smart Cambridge is a focus for the behaviour change work. Our idea really is to do the overall coordination, but the bits that we particularly focus on within Smart Cambridge are obviously the more sort of digitally focused elements, but we're very conscious of the fact that that has to join up with everything. And really across the whole programme, we have to have an eye to the fact that there's no point building a thing unless people are actually going to use it, and that requires behaviour change. So in terms of the work we're currently doing, a lot of that focus is around the City Access Making Connections work. And we're currently working with the sort of director of City Access to shape the next phase so that we can get in at the beginning. So it's the sort of ideation about what we're doing and then the scoping, and obviously that will morph into delivery. So perhaps in a way, this was slightly skated over in the paper in the sense of that element of the work, because it's sort of taking shape at the moment. I would also say that a lot of the things that I have highlighted in the paper are the foundation blocks of things we need to do. So understanding the data, understanding the impact of data and how people respond to that. It is only one element of behaviour change, but it is a key foundational element. So, yes, so in a sense now the slightly, the bigger piece in a way. So the email that was referred to, Karen, that has been sent to some people, I was copied on it, raises a number of issues about bus data. And we have had a bit of correspondence with somebody who I think is possibly a colleague of the secretary of the Cambridge Bus Users Group. It raised a number of things. Some of it is about the quality of bus data overall. And, you know, we are the first to understand and acknowledge that bus data and accuracy of bus data is massively important. But actually the real-time bus data feeds are not our responsibility. They are actually the responsibility of the Combined Authority and the bus operators. They both sort of play a different role in that. Our role has been to influence that, and about 3 years ago we did some quite detailed work identifying issues and feeding those in, and managed to get many of those fixed. And kind of where we are with that at the moment is that as issues arise, we discuss those, feed them into those whose responsibility it is. Now, my suspicion, but I don't think we've really finished sort of thinking and analysing this, is that quite a lot of the recent changes in buses and timetables and the difficulties that our operators are facing with getting sufficient drivers that they've referred to has led to some of the problems, not all of them by any stretch, but things like the bus operators noting in a timely fashion that a bus is going to be cancelled is critical. There were a couple of specific issues raised in the email. One of them is about the smart panels that we sort of offered to organisations to put in their lobbies that have information about travel and other things. That was a collaboration between us and the Computer Lab. And we kind of did it originally as a trial, but developed it into a kind of no or low cost option for people wanting to display that information as part of the whole behaviour change thinking. Computer Labs had a few difficulties with resourcing. A key resource has left. We are working with them to overcome those difficulties. But in the meantime, working with the Combined Authority, we now have a commercial offering that has better support and maintenance because it's a commercial offering. So the upside is it's got kind of more robust support and maintenance. The downside is that it costs organisations more to implement. And we're currently trying to think through whether we continue with both offerings or maybe just focus on the commercial offering. But we haven't come to a conclusion. We need to talk to more people about that. The other point that the email referred to was the totem at the station. And the author of that email is quite right in the sense that we have had some serious difficulties with that totem. Partly these have been caused by the enormous amount of work going on in that area. So if on any given day we have both power and connectivity, we consider ourselves lucky. It's been on and off a lot. But there is another issue that the supplier we chose has proven to not really understand bus data in quite the way they presented. So our thinking is that we'd like to retain the hardware, the actual physical totem, because it seems like a crying shame to get rid of it. It costs money and it's, you know, and all the rest of it. So our thinking is to run a competitive procurement to see whether we can find somebody who can use that to better effect. The author also picked up on a point that I'd made, which was that there's a next bus to feature, so next bus to Addenbrooke's. And the point that I was trying to make in the paper, but I don't think perhaps I did it very clearly, was that the feature of that, doing that kind of thing, is incredibly useful, I think, we think, from the kind of feedback we've had. Because when you've got multiple services and multiple bus stops all serving one destination, especially people who aren't familiar with the city, you don't want them running up and down between bus stops, self-evidently. But the author is entirely right. The data on there has not been good. And so as a result, we're just exploring at the moment whether we switch either that off or the whole totem off until we can get accurate data on there. So I think there's possibly a little bit of misunderstanding, which I could have clarified better in the paper about we're trying to influence the bus data, we don't control it. But some of the other points are things we're actively working on at the moment. Sorry for the long answer on that, Chair. So I think the other points, I think, Katie, thank you for your feedback, and the work that we're doing on centre guidance and all these things are trying to retain that agility, that flexibility in the investments we've made. We do work very closely with the Shared Planning Service to support them in the development of no and low car communities, and will continue to do so. And you made the point about ticketing. Yes, I think we'd all agree that simplified ticketing, whether that's, at its simplest, it's across bus companies, but then buses and trains, and then potentially buses, trains and micro-mobility, and you can add to this. We have done a little work in this area, but this is something that we want to continue to work on, of course, in collaboration with the combined authority in terms of how they manage their responsibilities for buses. Yes, thank you for the point, Helen, about external communication. I think that's something that we need to think about and address. It's unfortunate when these sort of malicious rumours start. As you, I know, understand, that is absolutely not our intention in trying to find more intelligent ways of using road space via signals. So thank you. We'll look at that.
Thanks, Debbie. Kristen Ann?
Thank you. Just an observation, trying to connect conversations, and thanks for your work. You also said it's designed to be flexible, which is good, and I would sort of encourage other schemes, because what I'm slightly lacking is sort of almost every aspect of the scheme, like the greenways. What's the smart aspect of that, or the roads? So are we always thinking about not just, it's a bit, having the smart work stream is really important, because actually it needs that expertise that you bring, but it's a bit like having a work stream called surfaces, which is sort of disconnected from the specialist topic. So really try and encourage and enrich to think about how the connectivity, for example, I'm thinking of our earlier conversations around lighting and different lighting solutions, or around segregation of routes and shared uses. Actually, is there something clever that can be done there to warn a cyclist has come? I don't know, but to how smart your smart work stream, with the skills and capabilities you've got there, can support some of the challenges that are coming forward in other work streams.
That's a good point. Heather Richards.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments, I think, following on from really the explanation that you gave in response to the email that was sent out. And I think it's really admirable that we're trying a lot of things, regardless of whether the data is perfect or whether it's with the trial for the university that ended up not being fully staffed, et cetera, going forward. But I think particularly as we're trying to get buy-in from the public on a lot of the work that we're trying to do with city access, et cetera, it may be worth considering how we make it more visible between what we're trialing to put forth for better future, better organization, alignment with the bus services that we're planning to bring on, and what's fully baked. Because I think going back to the changes that were made around the behavioral aspect, people are not going to buy into any of this if they're thinking that going forward we're not able to confidently provide them with confident access to the data they need to take advantage of, for example, the bus programs that we plan on rolling out into the future. So I think maybe in terms of the work that we're doing to communicate what we're doing within that work stream, I think to your point, the public doesn't know, but those that do probably don't know the difference between things that were trials, things that we or openly acknowledging that the full data isn't there, and what is an appropriate, proper scheme. And so just a suggestion in terms of maybe how we're communicating that to the public.
Thanks, Heather. Neil, did I have you? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few quick comments. Thank you very much. The data is so important. When it comes to passenger transport, people want something that's reliable, something that runs on time, so that as humans we don't like to wait, and it's giving us the impression that our time isn't worth anything. You know, it becomes a public humiliation system, not a public transport system. I recently saw one of these live maps in West Road Concert Hall, and is that one of ours? It's something interesting.
I'm not actually sure that it is. I don't have. We can check that for you for sure.
Sorry. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Shayler. We can check that out.
Chair, I have a photograph, so I can share it later.
Very good. Alex.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, Debbie, thank you very much for your work on this one. I think, like others have said before, this is an area that gets probably less of our time than it should do, because it is so important and can completely revolutionise what we're doing and massively amplify all of the other projects that we have on. To pick up on Helen's point earlier on about smart signals, it was very good to read in the report about the work we've been doing on smart signals, particularly with the general public viewpoints that we're seeing at the moment. So it would be very good if we could publicise that a bit further and show what we are doing there, because it is very good to hear the work that we're doing to reduce traffic, just simply from smart technology. I was also really pleased to see the work done on deploying sensors across the city. One thing on that, though, it would be really good if we could firstly have a map of where those are so that we can see where they are. I've had a lot of reports recently of people questioning what on earth these boxes are. So it would be good to be able to have some pictures and things to be able to communicate to residents that this is what they are, this is what they're doing. And secondly, would it be possible for us to open up that data to the public? Because we obviously have a couple of world-class universities here, and I'm sure there are many people that would love to be able to work with that data in Cambridge and perhaps use that for other bigger projects. Going on to robots and CAV, obviously you've probably seen the County Council, we were able to get Starship robots onto our streets recently, which is rather amazing to see little robots delivering us food. I know with our CAV bids, they are very exciting, and it's very good to see the work we've done. They do limit us somewhat, though, in using, obviously, UK companies and all of those sorts of things. They all come with strings, shall we say. If the CAV bids aren't successful, can I ask what's being done to approach other commercial providers that might not be English, or that might be operating in other areas? I know, obviously, Waymo has now extended into fully driverless cars without humans anywhere behind the wheel. They are now in 3 different cities in America, just gone to LA and San Francisco. And being there earlier in the year, it's quite startling to see cars driving around with nobody at the wheel. So it'd be good to explore perhaps some of our contacts that we have there, this being Cambridge. I hope that we do have many contacts within those companies. The smart stuff around buses, incredibly good. I think I've mentioned this to you before, though, but with the city access piece, it'd be really nice to see what else we could do around smart routing as well. I think we see already that there is tons of comments around buses at times being completely overloaded and other times being empty. If there's somehow we can start gathering data on that and enabling the bus companies to, run an extra bus when suddenly they know the concert hall is about to, or the Corn Exchange is about to kick out a load of people, putting on an extra bus there would be really useful. So anything we can do around that would be good. And the ducting as well was really good to hear about. Are we charging utilities when they use our ducts, or is there anything we can do around there to kind of monetize that goes back into our maintenance problems earlier on? That if we're paying to put these ducts in and saving utilities a lot of money to be able to digging up the road, I feel like we should be getting something back off them somewhere. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I've got no one else indicating at the moment, and I think possibly we need to be drawing this to a close. Debbie, there were some comments there which we can all note.
Yeah.
the questions. Could you just deal with those?
Yes, I think there are a few sort of broader points. I'm not sure this was a question, but about communications, there are several points there that I think we need to note and think about and take away. In terms of the questions about the West Road Concert Hall screen, we will need to check that. I'm just trying to pick out the questions. I think, Dan, would you be able to pick up a couple of points that I know you know a lot about, the approaching the non-UK commercial operators in terms of autonomous vehicles and also the commercialisation of ducting?
Yep, certainly. So the government has formed a body called Zenzik, which is actually funded by the autonomous vehicle industry, and they do have links with a number of operators abroad, and we are engaging with them fully, and they can facilitate conversations with companies for us. So we'll continue to have those conversations. On the point around ducting, Connecting Cambridgeshire set up a joint venture with the university called Light Blue Fibre, and we are making that ducting and fibre available to the market through that body.
To pick up one point, Councillor Beckett, that you raised about smart routing and buses being full and empty and all the rest of it. One of the things that we are doing and will be continuing to do is feeding back to the combined authority about some of the expectations we need to embed. And it's only a part of this, but we might know where a bus is, but we don't know how full it is, and that needs to be addressed. The occupancies, I know that's only one half of the equation that you raised about routing, but it is an important one. So that's something that we intend to continue to discuss with colleagues at the Combined Authority.
Thanks very much, Debbie. So I'm going to draw this to a close, if I may. There hasn't been a particular challenge to any of your future work programme. I think several contributors have requested that you add to that some consideration of how the work can be appropriately shared more with the public, and also means by which we can be sure it's being connected with our other work streams. There have been some other comments which I'm sure we will show up in the minutes and we'll transmit to the board. But are members broadly happy with support for what is proposed as a work stream with those specific additions, and also a thanks for what you're doing, which I heard from all quarters of the room. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Debbie. We then come to our final item on the agenda, which is item number 9, developing the GCP approach to biodiversity net gain. And we have no other inputs to this apart from the officer's report and then our debate. So, Niamh, I think you're going to introduce it. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just ahead of that, you've met Thomas twice now, but just to introduce my colleague, Michelle, who's done lots of work around this as well. So this sets out, a bold approach to biodiversity net gain across the programme. This issue, it's really important. It's been raised here a range of times over the course of certainly the years that I've been involved here. And I think members were really keen that officers brought something back to set out a broad approach, which is what this paper does. I think the general sentiment is around, we could be confined to the kind of statutory advice around this topic, but what we've heard from members is that they want us to be ambitious, and they want to understand what more we can do. In terms of the approach we're taking, and I was talking to the Vice Chair about this earlier, this is all about doing this through our partners, and the expertise that we have within our partner organisations and indeed locally. Otherwise it won't work. It won't be ambitious in the way that I think members want it to be. And indeed, should members support the broad approach, that, you know, the first thing we'll do is go away and continue the conversations that are already ongoing through groups like the Landscape, Heritage and Ecology Group, which GCP set up some years ago and which my colleague Thomas chairs, which met yesterday. And you know, this work is ongoing, and we'd like to do more. Is the kind of summary, Chair. Happy to take any questions or further steers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neve. Now, Katie, you indicated you'd like to speak. Go ahead.
I'm really pleased to see this is coming, and we have an opportunity to actually define the approach more clearly. I think all of the local authorities are very aware about the climate crisis and emergency, and the biodiversity crisis is very much linked with that, but it is different, and I think having this focus is important. We also have such really good local expertise within the local authorities, and I think utilising them where appropriate for their very important local knowledge around the whole area, because it's very specific local knowledge is very important to getting the best out of improving nature. And I see that you have picked up on that and are already doing that. One of the points you have made is about the red line boundaries. So, and I just want to make a comment about that. The Chisholm Trail, I think, when it was had a red line boundary, but obviously that is the boundary of the track, which is hard, and therefore there's no gain in net biodiversity. And I think it's important to think a bit more broadly. So if the outcome of the Chisholm Trail has been some really good support for biodiversity right next to the trail. So there's the work in Ditton Meadows, the Barnwell Wildlife Site, the Coldham's Common, and also the voles in the bank of the River Cam. There are other examples where there's a improved cycleway along Arbury Park has resulted in a community project with local residents to improve the biodiversity of that park. So there's already very good examples, but I do think the red line boundaries need to be maybe considered a bit more broadly, because if you, within a proposed infrastructure project, it will be going through different areas of very important nature. Some parts will be much more important than others. Some may have very little importance for biodiversity. And understanding where these routes go through and how we can support the nature locally along the routes is important. And it may be that the red line boundaries need to have maybe a red shade next to certain areas where there is already important nature. Because I think I feel very strongly that if possible, the improvements need to be local and not, if it can't be on site because it's a track or a road, it needs to be adjacent as much as possible, rather than being offset to an existing established biodiversity project. So there's a sort of hierarchy of the local nature improvements that we would, I think, aim to achieve. But I think this is really exciting, and I look forward to more of the detail coming through. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. I've got Claire Ruskin, Karen and Neil.
I like the paper, and thank you for delivering this. However, I hate the phrase up to 20% biodiversity. I would like to replace that with more than 10% and ideally 20% or more. Something more ambitious than up to 20%, which to me says, well, 5 would do. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Karen.
Yeah, that was actually the first thing I was going to say. It's great to see you're going beyond the statutory requirements, but it'd be good to be as ambitious as possible in that, please, as well. Just picking up on some of the stuff that was mentioned around red lines. Clearly, they're not helpful when thinking about nature because it doesn't respect boundaries. So it's great to see that you do plan to work with other partners to look at this more holistically and really encourage you to do that. I guess all of this, when you're looking at net gain, needs baseline data, and it would be good to know how you're going to source your baseline data as well, and also how you're going to resource this, because is that part of each project, or is there more holistic view to this again as part of that? And then thinking about, have we actually monitored and reported on this for any of the projects that have completed already? I'm not sure. I mean, some projects like Chisholm Trail Phase 1 has actually completed. Have we? What did we do in relation to that, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. It's, I think, important to keep the focus on what we're trying to achieve. And in the past, we had a measure of how degraded native ecosystems were, and this was the ones that had more biodiversity tended to be less degraded. But sometimes we fall into an affirmation of consequences fallacy by simply planting a few more different species. That increases the biodiversity, but it doesn't necessarily make it more supportive of local ecosystems or nature or going forward. So we need to think about progression, colonizing plants, the shrubs, the trees, this sort of thing. And so rewilding is about really setting up the conditions such that the ecosystem then can go forward and increase its own ecosystem. And the thing is that we have great experts here in Cambridge. And so again, I would encourage collaboration with the departments on all of this. The other things I wanted to say was that talking to not only beekeepers but pollinators in general, sometimes even when we plant a few different species of tree, it might be worthwhile thinking about staggered flowering times, that sort of thing. And also think about human foragers, make it useful and accessible for people gathering and foraging, and also learning and teaching about fungus and all kinds of native and natural things. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just picking up a couple of points around the 20%, the up to, it's really useful to have that steer. I think that's exactly why we think we need to go and do a bit more work to understand what the kind of art of the possible is, and what kind of resource and financial implications that might have. So I think we'd quite like to bring that back to you once we've done that work in the middle of next year. Around kind of red lines. So we think we need to take a programme approach to this, so we can have this kind of holistic, so we can take a holistic approach. And the idea of shaded red lines, I think we can feed into to the next phase of work. On baseline data and monitoring, I'll turn to Thomas around what's already been done.
So a number of schemes have already done kind of biodiversity and net gain calculations. But the issue we have is that, in effect, the guidance has changed over the years. So different metrics are being used now than what they were previously. And we need to bring, a consistent approach across the programme. So part of the next piece of work is to, take the work that's been done and make sure that we establish that baseline and that it's done in a consistent way. The schemes that have gone through the planning system, like Cambridge South West Travel Hub, and Baberham Park and Ride Extension, have kind of published biodiversity net gain kind of calculations within their documentation. But as I said, I think we need to take a kind of a step back in a way and look at the latest metric that Natural England use and do a consistent approach to make sure that baseline is consistent.
Thank you. Okay, so Helen, you have something?
I've made this point before, but I shall make it again, and it does echo something that Katie says. I think we should be aiming for as much of this biodiversity net gain to be adjacent to our own schemes as possible, and as little as possible to be sort of somewhere else. And if you ask me whether I prefer 10% net gain in situ or adjacent to, or 20% somewhere else, I'd go for 10% adjacent to or in situ. And we must at all costs avoid the sort of situation we've got in Qatar at the moment, where they're claiming that this is a net zero World Cup, which is clearly completely ludicrous, because they're claiming, they've built a few forests somewhere across the other side of the world, and we really, we've got to make sure that we're not sort of shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, that we've destroyed this corridor, but it's all right. Over there, 50 miles away, is some lovely nature reserve that most people will never be able to visit. So I'm not saying we shouldn't do any of that, but if we could say the 10% that's going to be a legal requirement is going to be adjacent to our own schemes, and the additional stuff might be sort of pulled elsewhere, I think that would be a good compromise.
Thanks, Helen. I just want to pop in a contribution of my own. I've still got Paul and Simon as well after that. But my point belongs really next to Helen's. When I was involved in talking about this, my instinct was, like other people who've spoken, to absolutely try and achieve the gain we're looking for around the project that it attaches to. And I think the reason for that in my head was that the biodiversity net gain is obviously something that we're chasing for broader ecological reasons, but actually, in many cases, it marries up with the goal of public acceptance of the projects that we're implementing. And people's views about the projects we're implementing usually relate to the place they're in and not to somewhere else. And so what in my mind we're doing by making that a priority is really, I think, unashamedly trying to achieve two goals, which I think which is an excellent thing to be trying to do. But it's been pointed out to me, though, that we need to be reasonable about the way we approach that as a hierarchy, because I think you can point to the cramming in of trees by the A14, which hasn't proved to be sustainable, but presumably was achieving someone's, Highways England's goal at the time. And so that, the need to establish what is sustainable and push that as far as it can be, but not go further just for the point of having it on a site, seems to me really important. And so we need to be sensitive to the threshold between those two levels, the red lines 1 and then the local habitat bank 2, so that we don't result in implementing biodiversity net gain that doesn't last longer than a couple of years, because that's not our goal. So can I go on to Paul, who indicated, and then Simon?
Yeah, I'm going to carry on the same topic, actually, presenting, I suppose, a slightly opposing view to what I've heard so far from people. I'm a member of the Climate and Environment Advisory Committee at South Cambs. We've had a number of talks from officers about biodiversity net gain. And I keep hearing from them that actually strategic sites are often better. They're easier to manage, easier to maintain. You're more likely to achieve the biodiversity net gain at those sites. I accept that there's some need to do it, to try and achieve something locally as well, because there are adverse impacts potentially locally. But from a biodiversity only point of view, often it's believed that strategic sites are very have a big part to play, and it comes down to maintenance again, largely. A bit like what we were talking about earlier. If we have these little strips of land next to the whether it's a greenway or whether it's a busway, they become extremely hard to manage. In maybe 30 years' time, they're not being managed at all. Whereas the strategic sites, we can guarantee that they're being managed by a body that's interested and motivated to maintain the biodiversity of that site. So that's the only point I have to make.
Thank you, Paul. And Simon.
Yes, I want to build on that and refer to section 3.6 of the report, which really sets it out in detail as to why Paul's point is really important. And the habitat gain relates to habitat after 30 years, and each scheme there has to be a habitat management and monitoring plan attached to it for a 30-year period. So that's kind of the legacy period. And if we just go on to section 4.2, it does make this reference to the importance of critical mass. So, and this balance between the strategic fit and existing conditions and so on. But the economies of scale and critical mass that come with the strategic site is really quite central to this. And the Wildlife Trust will tell you about the, who are developing the Great Fen, will tell you about the importance of strategic scale landscape for habitat and the development of the sustainability of the ecosystems. So I appreciate the point about the immediate mitigation adjacent to a site, but when you're attaching 30-year maintenance plans and you've got a 30-year habitat net gain measure to target to meet, then you've got to be looking at scale.
Okay, thank you. And Neil, you wanted to come up, but I hope very briefly.
Appreciate the points made by Councillor Smith and Bear Park about remote sites. To counter that a little bit, we also look for wildlife corridors, and a lot of our schemes have that virtually built in. I want to have a small call out for fire breaks. Part of what we're doing is CO2 capture in some of these ones, and it would be a shame in the hot, dry summers it all to go back up in smoke. And I think that is the kind of direction that we're going. So fireness awareness. Thank you.
Neil, thank you. And then I've got Annika. That's the last I have.
Mine's just a very short point, but much like you were saying about Qatar saying they had their sites on the opposite side of the world, it would be good to know that the sites would be in Cambridgeshire, South Cambridgeshire, so that we get the benefit of them as well.
Thank you. Neve. Do you always wait until the end?
Chair, I knew I'd end up there anyway. No, it's just a very quick one based on what's being said, okay, that I think there should be some emphasis put on biodiversity and the preservation as well, rather than just the gain. We hear all the time about the gain, but if we could preserve what we've got as a priority, that would be very helpful, because displacement of wildlife is a problem. We might, in Camborne put a forest in Fulbourn, but I don't think the hedgehogs would quite make it across all the main roads in between. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Helen. Neve.
Thank you, Chair. I think several members made a very similar point. I think that's exactly why we need to do further work to understand what the kind of art of the possible is, really. And when we do bring your options back, they will be in a level of detail where you'll be able to determine kind of geographies. And the point around preservation and displacement will be fed into the next phase of work as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Neve. So to sum that up, I think that, that there's a lot of support for this. I think members are probably saying 20% biodiversity net gain is great, but don't necessarily stop there if there is routes to go further and they're practical. We've had a little bit of different balances of opinion around the mitigation hierarchy, but I mean, I'm reading what is written there, and I think that collectively members are saying that, that there needs to be some balance, and that we need to be sensitive about and acutely aware of what can be sustainable around the red lines before we cram stuff in that isn't going to serve us in the long run. But I think support for what is said here and interest in what we learn as we go forward. Are members happy with that? Well, that's great. So that was the last item on the agenda, and it didn't take an enormously length of time. Yes, 2.5 hours. So thank you very much for your contributions, everyone. We should note that our next meeting is on the Thursday, the 16th of February at 2 o'clock at a location to be announced. Goodbye and happy trip home.